Welcome back. We're discussing Canada's fiscal state and how it impacts you, the taxpayer, and of course, families across this country. And joining me for that conversation is Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Franco, just before we went to commercial break, we were discussing what each Canadian family, well, in this case, Canadians, what their debt load would be. So for a Canadian born today, that child, that baby, that infant, as she grows through life, what would her debt load be?
Well, just today, because of the federal government, that little baby girl born, she's already on the hook for about $30,000 in federal government debt alone. And of course, that has to be paid back one way or another. And these massive deficits, these massive costs are being shoved onto the backs of future generations. So like I said, the baby girl born today, she's already on the hook for about $30,000 just in federal debt alone. And, I think all parents, all grandparents, they want to leave their kids and grandkids with a chance of financial success. But the way that this federal government is spending like crazy, the way it's just completely disregarding fiscal responsibility, you have the government in Ottawa really punishing future generations with this massive debt burden.
Okay, so let's talk about some of this controversial spending or the spending that concerns you. Give me some examples of what kind of spending programs you feel have really loaded up the debt and perhaps are unnecessary.
Okay, well, let's just talk about, we'll get into some of the bigger ways that the federal government has been spending like crazy, but let me just put a nice little illustration on some of the waste, okay? Some of the smaller items. Well, last fall you had Mr. Trudeau tour the Indo-Pacific region like India, Indonesia, Singapore. It was a 6-day trip. And the federal government spent almost $2 million over the 6-day trip, including about $200,000 on airplane food. $200,000 on airplane food for a 6-day trip after the federal government had already said that they would do better and cut down on these costs. Well, they were again just spending crazy amounts of money traveling abroad. Again, a 6-day trip. $2 million hit to the taxpayer, $200,000 spent on airplane food. And, just to put that in perspective, you have so many Canadians that are struggling right now with their own grocery bill. Well, $200,000, that would cover the average family's grocery bill for almost 2 decades.
Wow, that is a lot. I mean, I don't know what they're eating on the plane, prime rib. It seems excessive. I assume the Prime Minister is traveling with a large crew, a large support staff, but it does, to me, seem excessive. Give us some more examples. What other things have caught your eye?
Okay, so that was a smaller relatively in terms of the entire budget, but here's a big one, the ballooning bureaucracy. So about more than half of the government's day-to-day spending goes to paying the salaries, the benefits, the bonuses of the federal bureaucracy. Okay, well, the federal government under Mr. Trudeau has added about 100,000 additional bureaucrats. 100,000 additional bureaucrats, okay? Now, that's an increase of about 40%. So ask yourself,
like,
are you getting 40% better services from the federal government? I think most Canadians, if not all, would say absolutely not. But that's some of the big spending that's going on here in Ottawa.
And sorry, that 100,000 extra bureaucrats, that's since 2015?
That's since Trudeau came to power after the 2015 election.
My goodness, it's almost been 10 years. Who knew? Wow, that's quite shocking. You asked about, are we getting better service? I recently had to file in a passport application for a family member, and I'll tell you, they're definitely not meeting the timeline. They're probably exceeding it by a while. So, not great, not great. So, these kinds of examples, we talked about the carbon tax, the deficit. I guess it leads me to question: is the government taking our fiscal state seriously?
No, it's absolutely not. It's just not. Remember when Trudeau first ran to be the prime minister back in 2015, he'd said he'd run a couple tiny, modest, insy-binsy little deficits and then finally balance the budget in 2019. Well, he didn't do that. He missed that balanced budget promise by like $20 billion. And that was even before COVID-19. So, is the government taking fiscal responsibility serious? No, it's not. It hasn't produced a plan to balance the budget. It has doubled the entire federal government debt. And, every day it seems like you get a new spending promise from the Trudeau government, billions of dollars to some new program that they have no idea how to pay for. And, even worse than all of that is now the government is raising taxes on Canadians who are already struggling to make ends meet. So the government is a huge problem when you consider just how much of a struggle Canadians are already going through. And now you have the federal government layering
Right.
on more debt and higher taxes.
Okay, we'll pick this up in just a moment.